Kicked his mom out to flip her house. Never knew she held a secret. $9.5 million war chest. Ma'am, you don't live here anymore. The sentence slipped from the stranger's lips as calmly as a grocery store greeting, yet it detonated in Grace Brooks's chest like a mortar round. 5 minutes earlier, she'd been juggling 2 bags of discounted produce, humming a hymn keys, dancing in her weather-cracked palm. Now she stood on the splintered porch she'd painted with her late husband, confronting a lock that glinted a shade of steel she did not recognize. Tick, tick, tick. The antique cuckoo clock beyond the doorway marked each second of her disbelieving silence, its muffled rhythm taunting her through the wall. Grace tried the key again, slower this time, as though reverence could coax brass into magic. Nothing. She pressed her ear to the door and heard stray notes of laughter, her son Tyler's baritone, mixing with Sierra Vaughn's breezy marketing guru cadence. Grace's begonia pot was gone from the window ledge. In its place, a sleek succulent glared back like a corporate logo, all edges and no fragrance. She knocked, first polite, then urgent. Sierra opened just wide enough for a single hazel eye to appraise Grace as though she were an unexpected invoice. Tyler said he'd call you. Papers are finalized. It's all standard asset optimization, Mrs. Brooks. Grace didn't flinch at the formality. She flinched at the past tense. Are finalized. 2 words that sliced 30 years of motherhood into confetti. Inside, a chair-scraped footsteps retreated, laughter resumed. Grace inhaled, tasting the lemon oil she'd rubbed into those very floorboards last week, and a pulse of heat surged behind her eyes. She stepped back, breath shallow. Her phone buzzed with an automated text from the bank, advertising a senior-friendly renovation loan. Irony felt like battery acid. She thumbed the screen. Dark tightened her grip on the dented cans of Bean's comfort food for emergencies. Leonard used to joke and noticed thin scratches around the lock where a screwdriver had once pried. Premeditation. The porch light flickered on, though the sun had only begun its descent, bathing her in sterile LED glare as if to spotlight an intruder. In that glare, she saw her late husband's brass nameplate, L. Brooks RN, unscrewed and tossed beside the mat like a spent shell casing. Tyler hadn't just changed a lock. He'd amputated lineage. Grace's lungs drew a steadying breath, dredging up the voice she used in trauma bays, low-measured commanding. This is not the end of me, she whispered a private prognosis only she could hear. The metal door stayed mute, but her resolve found a pulse. Dropping the bags, Grace reached into her cardigan pocket and felt the worn leather of her little notebook, the one that held scripture, versus medication charts, and buried in coded shorthand the routing numbers of a settlement Tyler never knew existed. Another clock ticked, this one in her wrist, her pulse aligning with the mission blooming in real time. She bent, retrieved the bruised apples and renegade can, now rolling toward the steps, and walked to her aging sedan. Behind her, Sierra's voice rose in a celebratory whoop, some joke about flipping Grandma's equity. Grace didn't slam the car door. She closed it with surgical precision, as though sealing a wound, and stared at the house until the porch light timed out, and darkness reclaimed the doorway. Only then did she start the engine, whispering to the vacant passenger seat, "Leonard, keep me steady." The sedan eased into the street, taillights fading like embers, but the fire inside her was only beginning to breathe. Because locks can be changed again, and this time she would hold the master key. Tyler used to cling to my scrubs like a vine. Now he's ripping out my roots. The words slipped from Grace's mouth before she realized she was talking to the windshield rainfall, drumming steady on the glass as the sedan idled behind an all-night pharmacy. She could still smell Sierra's synthetic vanilla perfume on her cardigan, a faint reminder that someone else now occupied her living room. Grace killed the engine, letting the silence press in. A single begonia cutting lay on the passenger seat, salvaged from a planter Tyler had tossed aside. Its soil left tiny brown constellations across the upholstery, as if charting every sacrifice she'd ever made. Dawn had not yet broken, and the dashboard clock blinked 3:00 a.m., the same hour 23 years earlier, when social services wheeled a pale, wheezing toddler into St. Agnes ER. She saw it all again: a cartoon t-shirt 2 sizes too big, fingers fisted in panic around her stethoscope, the tiny rasp of asthma that matched the beep of the heart monitor. Back then, nurses whispered that the foster system would cycle him out in a month. Grace heard a different call. She remembered signing temporary guardianship forms with trembling hands, Leonard laughing softly beside her. "Girl, you're tucking destiny into a car seat." They painted Tyler's room, turquoise planted begonias, so he'd always come home to color, and saved every crayon drawing like a mortgage deed. Yet somewhere between piano recitals and prom night, he began measuring worth in square footage, not memories. Grace lifted the notebook from her coat pocket. Its leather cover was soft with age edges feathered from years of sliding in and out of scrub pockets. She flipped past prayer lists and medication schedules to the page titled simply Quiet Fortune. Underneath a string of routing numbers coiled like a secret code, $9.5 million. Compensation for the hospital's lethal mistake with Leonard. Money that could have bought mansions, but she'd chosen peace, instead burying it where greed couldn't sniff it out. Now the irony tasted metallic. The son she protected from scarcity had evicted her in pursuit of abundance. Her phone vibrated with a notification from an old group chat niece Ruby, posting a link to her investigative podcast. Evicting Mom on how house flipping targets the elderly. Grace's chest tightened. Ruby had always been flame to Tyler's frost, fierce about injustice, louder than Grace ever allowed herself to be. The episode thumbnail showed a boarded-up porch, startlingly like Grace's own. A pulse of danger accompanied hope. If this story reached the public, Tyler would strike faster, maybe drain her unseen accounts. But silence had already forfeited her home. Perhaps a little noise could salvage her dignity. Grace tapped the contact labeled Ruby Journalism Rebel. It rang twice before a voicemail picked up. She inhaled, feeling the cold begonia stem between her fingers, and spoke with the steadiness of a trauma nurse threading an IV baby. It's Aunt Grace. "I've got a story that starts with a changed lock and ends with 9 million reasons to fight. Call me back before sunrise." She hung up, heart racing at the risk of exposing what she'd hidden for years. Outside, neon pharmacy letters flickered, reflecting in the side mirror like emergency lights arriving on scene. Grace tucked the begonia cutting into the notebook closed, both gently, and leaned against the headrest. In 2 hours, the sun would rise, and with it the next phase of a battle she was finally willing to wage. "Grace, if you're really sitting on 9 mil, you just became the hottest target in Mississippi." Ruby's voice crackled through the burner phone Grace had grabbed from a truck stop vending machine, her urgency sowing equal parts fear and resolve into the dawn pink air. 20 minutes earlier, Grace had parked outside the Highway 20 diner, a squat building whose fluorescent sign blinked like a lie detector. Inside, CJ Bell nursed his second black coffee silver brows, drawn into thunder. Grace slid into the vinyl booth, begonia notebook tucked tight beneath her coat, and hit speaker so Ruby could join the War Council. CJ's gravel baritone rumbled first, paper trails dirty but fixable. Tyler forged disclosure lines. "Judge won't like that. What I need are dates, witnesses, and a reason the court should pity a millionaire." Grace flinched. The title felt like borrowed silk, beautiful, unearned, and still in the box. She unclipped a hospital pen and listed every betrayal in precise medical handwriting. Each bullet, a pulse beat, Sunday brunch. Signature trap, guest in my own house. Comment, realtor, walk through lock change. Across the table, CJ sketched arrows, turning memories into evidence. Ruby cut in. "My podcast can expose the systemic angle. Predatory rehab loans, race-coded marketing, all of it. But we need visuals. Aunt G, you comfortable going?" Public. Grace stared at her reflection in the diner window, eyes rimmed crimson from a night with no bed. Public meant shame on display, but shame had already unpacked on Tyler's Instagram. She exhaled. People deserve to know how quick mercy gets flipped for profit. CJ tapped the table, twice the signal he used in court when a witness had locked their testimony. "Good. First, move file a fraud petition before Tyler drains anything else. Second, freeze the deed with an emergency injunction. I'll handle paperwork. You handle proof. Proof arrived faster than hope. Marisol Delgado, the retired postal clerk next door, texted Ruby a shaky video, Tyler crowing about liquidating Mom's equity while Sierra pried Leonard's brass nameplate off the porch. Grace's throat tightened. The image of that plate had haunted her, but seeing Sierra's manicured fingers twist the screw was gasoline on embers. CJ's face hardened. That's intent caught in 1080p. He sent the clip to his paralegal with 3 words, load the cannon. Just then, Grace's burner buzzed again, this time an automated push from the bank app she rarely opened. Large balance inquiry flagged by joint account holder. Joint Grace had no joint accounts. Her pulse spiked. Tyler was fishing. If he learned about the settlement before court protection, he could spin narratives faster than Ruby's mic could debunk them. CJ saw the color drain from her cheeks. We're on a clock now, Evie. Can you move the funds? Grace swallowed fear like a pill. Not yet. Any sudden transfer could signal panic. I'll let patience be my armor and paperwork my sword. She snapped the notebook shut, rooting the begonia leaf between its pages, as if planting it in fertile resolve. The diner's door chime jangled. A tall silhouette entered Broad Shoulders' slick blazer, holding a manila envelope stamped with Tyler's LLC logo. His gaze swept the room, landed on Grace froze. Sierra must have sent a messenger. Ruby's voice hissed through the speaker Aunt G, who just walked in. Grace squared her shoulders, meeting the stranger's stare across a sea of formica. Trouble? She whispered, fingers tightening around the notebook. The messenger started toward the booth, the envelope raised like a white flag, or a warrant, and the din of the diner dimmed to a heartbeat. Grace inhaled the bitter scent of CJ's coffee, tasted the years of discipline that had once steadied a trauma ward, and prepared to prove she could still suture a wound before it bled out hope. Because some letters you sign, and some letters you rip to shreds, right in front of the man who delivers them. Sign here, and you'll never have to see a courtroom. The courier's voice was soft, but carried the chill of stainless steel, as he slid the envelope across the diner table, its gold foil logo, Bayou, BLVD, Lux Lofts, gleaming like a dare. Grace didn't sit back. She leaned forward, eyes steady, letting the silence pinch his confidence. CJ broke it first. My client doesn't execute contracts delivered without counsel present. He tapped the folder with a knuckle as hard as gavel would. But I'm counsel and I'm present. So let's read this circus ticket. One flick of the clasp and a single-page addendum appeared. Grace would receive 30 days hotel lodging, a prepaid debit card worth $5,000, and a non-disparagement clause thicker than a phone book. In return, she'd waive all claims to the house effective immediately. Grace's pulse thudded in her ears, but her voice flowed calm as clinic oxygen. $5,000 for 30 years of sacrifice, she mused, tracing the begonia notebook's spine beneath the table. That breaks down to about 15 cents a day. Cheaper than dog food. The courier shifted cheeks, blotching. Ma'am, Tyler wanted to spare you the stress of court. Grace raised one brow. Then why send a stranger to buy my silence at sunrise? CJ slid the page back into the envelope, tore the signature line clean off, and handed the strip to Grace like a used bandage. She folded it once-twice, then fed it into the courier's untouched coffee. The paper soaked up the dark brew words, blurring into meaningless ink. Consider your offer digested, she said. Outside cloud cover cracked open daylight, flooding the parking lot like truth through a confession. Grace's burner buzzed bank alert, potential fraudulent withdrawal attempt. Account temporarily frozen. Her gut clenched. Tyler was still pawing through doors he didn't know were alarmed. She dialed Ruby on speaker while CJ fished keys from his coat. Podcast drops in 2 hours, Ruby answered, winded. We've got Marisol's video county deed records and a statistician breaking down race bait lending. Aunt G, you sure you want your name on this? Grace glanced at the diner neon reflecting off the chrome bumper of CJ's Buick. I spent decades teaching patients to face pain before it metastasized. Put my name in the title. CJ steered onto the highway toward the regional credit union, the only branch manager who still remembered Leonard's annual toy drive donations. We freeze the freeze, he said, stomping the gas. Billboard after billboard hawked instant equity seminars, each a reminder of the machine grinding elders into listings. Grace clutched the notebook. The pressed begonia leaf had wilted at the edges, its veins dark as capillaries. "Stay alive," she whispered to it, the same words she'd whispered to Tyler during midnight asthma attacks. Her phone rang again, unknown number. She answered. Tyler's voice spilled out syrupy and sharp. "Mom, I offered you generosity. Now you're siding with bottom feeders? Pull the podcast sign, the addendum, and I'll throw in a condo in Gulf Shores." Grace felt the highway vibration hum up through her shoes, grounding her. "Son, you can't gift what you stole. I'm reclaiming, not negotiating." A beat of dead air, then Tyler's tone iced over. "Then brace for war." The line clicked dead. CJ glanced over the dashboard. He's bluffing. Grace slipped the phone into her bag. He's coughing before the storm. I've treated that sound. It means the lungs are weak. Ahead, the credit union sign flickered, open 8 a.m. They had 4 minutes before doors unlocked, and paperwork raced reality. Grace inhaled, straightened the stethoscope she'd looped around her neck for courage, and squared her shoulders as the Buick rolled to a halt. Because some inheritances are measured in dollars, others in the breath you refuse to surrender. "Mom, your son tried to liquidate $9 million at 7:02 a.m. Was that authorized?" The branch manager's question rang through the marble lobby like a fire alarm, and every syllable tightened the stethoscope around Grace's neck. She stood beneath a mural of smiling retirees the bank used for marketing, knowing full well the smiles rarely made it to the parking lot. CJ placed his briefcase on the counter, voice level. "We are filing an emergency revocation of any co-signatory rights. Fraud petition docket number is stamped here. Act on it or answer to the judge." The manager's hands trembled as she scanned the order. When her eyes found the judge's signature, she straightened so quickly her name tag clinked. "I'll secure the accounts immediately." Behind her, tellers whispered, glancing at Grace the way med students eye a patient whose vitals just flatlined, then soared. Grace felt neither rich nor fragile. She felt like tempered glass, clear but ready to cut whoever swung a hammer. Outside, Ruby's podcast notification popped on every phone in the lobby at once. The opening line blaring from a teller's speaker. "When a son flips his mother's house who really profits family fintech," or "the scars of redlining." A thrill of electricity ran through Grace. Exposure was risky, but silence was fatal. CJ guided her to a side office where the branch's IT lead locked the account with a biometric override and generated a fresh trust under Grace's maiden name. While printers spat pages, her phone lit again an email from Sierra's PR firm accusing Grace of elder financial abuse against Tyler. The spin shot ice up Grace's spine. CJ read it, jaw hardening. Classic offense from shame the victim before she can testify. He drafted a rebuttal for the podcast show notes, citing the bank's own fraud alerts as proof Tyler was the predator, not prey. Minutes later, sirens wailed down Broad Street local news vans, not police. A cameraman leapt from the first van lens trained on the branch doors. Ruby's tweet had gone viral. Locks can change, but justice turns the key. Grace watched the hashtag climb on a plasma screen ticker above the tellers, her name oscillating with mortgage crisis stats and clips of Marisol's porch video. The site stirred conflicting currents, fear of humiliation, pride in truth, until she noticed one frame freeze on the brass nameplate Leonard once polished every Easter. Under the lights, it looked less like a relic and more like a badge reclaimed. The manager returned with a stack of forms and a new debit card embossed Len's place. Trust Grace Brooks, trustee. Grace signed each stroke, a stitch suturing the wound Tyler had carved. But payment for peace is never simple. Her phone vibrated again, this time a private message from Tyler himself. No threats, just a single photo of Grace's begonia planter smashed on the driveway petals strewn like confetti at a funeral. His caption read, "You water weeds, they still die." Grace's heartbeat slowed, steadied. She saved the image, leaned into the doorway, light and whispered so only CJ could hear. "Then we'll plant a garden so wide he can't scorch it all." CJ nodded, pocketed the new trust documents, and pushed open the door to the waiting cameras. Because when your enemy burns your symbol, you don't hide the ashes, you show the world how fertile they can be. Your son just hired a crisis management firm that charges 20 grand an hour to call you a fraud in high definition, ready to fight back. In 4K, CJ's question cracked through the news van chaos as he ushered Grace onto the courthouse steps. Reporters fanning out like gulls scenting open water. Grace tightened the stethoscope around her neck. A relic turned armor and felt the cold morning sun catch its steel. The glint flashed into a dozen camera lenses, at once a silent declaration that she would diagnose the rot in broad daylight. Ruby's podcast crew was already live streaming microphone, emblazoned with the hashtag #SawLocksCanChange. Behind her, Marisol clutched a foam board plastered with stills of the smashed begonia planter, the visual echo of Tyler's cruelty. One reporter shouted, "Ms. Brooks, any comment on allegations you siphoned retirement funds?" Grace's pulse held steady. "If telling the truth is siphoning, I pray the whole pipeline bursts," she replied, voice low but cannon loud through boom mics. The crowd murmured. CJ smiled like a man who'd just drawn a royal flush. Inside the hearing room smelled of varnish and panic. Tyler sat at the respondents' table in a tailored navy suit, but the vein twitching at his temple betrayed the price of that polish. Sierra perched beside him, eyes flicking between TikTok notifications and the paralegal's notes. The judge's silver-haired reputation for eviscerating flimsy arguments opened with a request for preliminary evidence. CJ rose, sliding a USB across the bailiff's palm. Exhibit A, security footage of the defendant attempting unauthorized wire transfers 90 minutes after locking his mother out of her residence. Screens lit up Tyler's digital fingerprint, hovering over a transfer all button. Gasps rippled. Sierra's phone slipped from her hand, clattering like a gavel on tile. Then CJ nodded to the gallery door. Ruby stepped forward, playing Marisol's porch video on loop Tyler, bragging about liquidating Mom. Grace watched her son's swagger projected 10 feet tall, the memory of his kindergarten asthma mask ghosting over the adult arrogance. A pang cut deep, but pity surrendered to purpose. Sierra attempted counterpunch, citing a glossy packet of elder care consent forms, but CJ flipped to page 3, where Tyler's signature bled into a forged notary stamp. Marisol's retired postal badge confirmed the mismatch. The judge's brow climbed. Tyler pinched his eyes shut, as if bargaining with darkness itself. Grace felt no triumph, only the throb of an old surgical fracture. Sometimes saving a life requires rebreaking a bone. She reached into her bag, pulled out the begonia stem, now brown brittle, and set it on the evidence table. "Plants die when uprooted without care," she said evenly. "Yet their seeds travel farther than the gardener who cast them aside." Cameras clicked, capturing symbol and statement in one frame. The judge requested a recess before ruling. Gavel struck, tension hanging like uncut wire. As bailiffs cleared the room, Tyler turned, eyes glassy. "Mom, it never had to be like this." Grace met the watery blue she once taught to follow bedtime constellations. "Yet here we are," she answered, voice neither cruel nor soft, merely surgical. She walked past him into the hallway, where Ruby thrust a phone toward her Lens Place crowdfunding page had hit $500,000 in pledges since the live stream began. Grace exhaled a breath that felt like fresh soil. Because sometimes a broken planter becomes the world's loudest seed, and the verdict hadn't even been read. When the judge re-entered, Tyler wasn't at his table. He was sprawled on the marble floor, clawing at air like a man trying to catch a memory. The room froze. Sierra shrieked. Bailiffs fumbled for a medic. But before protocol could mobilize, Grace knelt beside the son who had emptied her closets. She unclipped the stethoscope she'd worn as armor all day and pressed the diaphragm to his chest. Wheeze, tight high, familiar. childhood asthma, roused by courtroom dust and panic. Grace tore open her tote, withdrew the emergency inhaler she'd packed out of habit, and guided the mouthpiece between Tyler's lips. Breathe in, count to 10, she whispered the same cadence she'd sung over Lego piles and algebra tears. Cameras whirred. The livestream audience watched the betrayed become the caretaker. Sierra's PR team had no spin prepared for maternal triage. Tyler's lungs opened like creaky doors. Color returned to his cheeks. Eyes glassy, he whispered, "Why help me?" Grace steadied him into a seated slump, the begonia stem still brittle in her other hand. "Because love isn't escrow," she answered, voice low enough for only him and a million viewers to hear. Bailiffs ushered paramedics forward. Grace stepped back, reclaiming composure, as CJ guided her to counsel's table. The judge cleared his throat, irritation softened by what he'd just witnessed. "Court will resume," he said, "and the record will note Ms. Brooks's assistance." Sierra attempted a sympathy plea, but CJ intercepted. "Your Honor, compassion is not concession. We rest on the facts already in evidence." The judge reviewed the timeline one final time, fraudulent deed, forged notary bank alerts, porch footage. Then he looked at Grace's stethoscope still warm around her neck, and spoke words that landed like sunrise after a power outage. Title transfer is void. Property to be returned to the petitioner. Further, the court refers potential criminal charges to the district attorney. Gasps rippled. Ruby's stream chat exploded with heart emojis and justice gifs. Grace inhaled, tasting relief mixed with sorrow. Victory felt lighter than expected, like an emptied suitcase you still reflexively brace to lift. But triumph carries its own cliff's edge. Outside the courthouse, protesters had gathered some waving Shire Team Tyler signs, accusing Grace of hoarding wealth. A rumor now flared that Len's place was a tax dodge. Sierra's firm pumped the narrative through influencer accounts before Tyler was even loaded into the ambulance. CJ scanned his phone, jaw ticking. They're spinning a martyr story, single son crushed by greedy matriarch. Grace tightened her grip on the wilted begonia. Then we show them what planting really looks like. She turned toward the microphones, heart steady yet braced, knowing the next words could either water the garden of public trust or salt it beyond repair. Because winning a verdict is one thing. Winning back the narrative is a battle that begins the moment the gavel stops echoing and the cameras are already rolling. "If wealth is a weapon," Grace declared into the thicket of microphones, "then watch me turn it into shelter." Her voice carried across the courthouse plazas, slicing through chants of cringed Team Tyler like a scalpel through gauze. Flashbulbs popped. Critics waited for a stumble, but Grace kept her spine level. She held up the crumbled begonia stem, now folded in a clear envelope of potting soil, and let the cameras zoom. "This was my son's idea of victory," she said, shaking the shards of petal and clay. "But every fragment is a seed, and seeds don't take sides. They just grow where they're given light." The plaza hushed the smear campaign, losing oxygen one heartbeat at a time. Ruby streamed the moment live, overlaying a donation link, "Help Len's Place bloom." Pledges spiked in real time, each ping a pulse point. That reminded Grace how quickly broken things could finance healing. 3 weeks later, under a cobalt sky in Pascagoula, Grace stood before a modest bungalow, freshly painted sunrise yellow. Reporters expected a grand mansion. What they found instead was a plaque, "Len's Place, where roots relearn to grow." Alma, the first resident, cut the ribbon with hands still stiff from arthritis, tears silvering her cheeks. Inside the living room walls were lined with donated books, a communal piano, and a shadow box containing Leonard's brass nameplate. Next to Grace's stethoscope, 2 lives dedicated to listening. On the back porch, raised garden beds waited soil, dark and eager. Grace knelt, poured the envelope of begonia fragments into her palm, and pressed them into the dirt. "Deep breaths," she whispered, bearing the past one petal at a time. That evening, a plain envelope arrived. No return address. Just 4 words in shaky handwriting. "I saw the live stream." Inside was Tyler's childhood crayon drawing of a turquoise house with a stick figure woman watering giant red flowers. No apology, no plea, only the picture and a bus ticket stub dated the day after the verdict. Grace traced the waxy outlines, feeling the tug of memory, but not its chains. She slid the drawing into the Lens Place guest book between donation receipts and volunteer sign-ups. Plants needed compost. Stories needed context. Both could thrive on what once rotted. As dusk melted into Gulf Coast lavender, Grace joined Alma and the new residents on the porch. Ruby angled her phone for one last stream, retirees in rocking chairs, garden beds, ready a nurse in her widow's cardigan, cradling hope like fresh seedlings. Comments flooded in, some cheering, some jeering. But Grace no longer measured truth in volume. She measured it in roots. Tomorrow, she told the women, we plant collard greens. And the day after that, maybe a whole orchard. Laughter drifted into the warm air, mingling with cicada song. Grace closed her eyes, listening not for sirens or signatures, but for the quiet click of a lock finally finding its rightful key. Because houses can be stolen, money can be twisted, yet the courage to rebuild is a door no thief has ever learned to open.